Picture this. It's 2014 and you're spending a day at the movie theater. The seats are facing a screen that will become your greatest mentor for the next 2 hours, and as the lights start to dim, you find yourself thinking,
everything is awesome.
that's right. In 1968, psychologists George Land and Beth Jarman conducted a creative survey with NASA. They were to identify signs of innovation from their team of engineers and scientists. However, due to its accuracy, they tested it on children aged 4 to 15 and adults with an average age of 31. The results were off to a great start, with 4 to 5-year-olds embracing a 98% in imagination. Now, if you're like me, you would have presumed they would have shattered more expectations once they got older. But that didn't seem to be the case. Over time, 10-year-olds dropped to a whopping 30%. Sure enough, the 15-year-olds plummeted to 12%, and the outcome the adults received? A remarkable 2%. This research reveals how a child's creative engine can produce an infinite supply of steam, until our environment doesn't nurture this way of thinking.
We heard the story about if you went into any kindergarten and asked how many people here sing and dance, everybody's hands would raise. And then if you went into a high school and you asked the same question, maybe one person in the drama department would raise their hand. And somewhere along the way, kids grow shame or feel like that's not what they can do. But when they're little, when they're kindergartners, they think, of course, I dance, I sing, I build, and that somehow goes away.
However, as soon as the Lego Movie was released, there was no surprise that it inspired a generation. Its message of creativity highlights how even when cultivating an ordinary life, we must practice opening the gateways to our imagination. As Einstein once wrote, creativity is intelligence having fun. And once I dove deep into the psychology of creativity, I couldn't hesitate to develop a framework called the creative tricycle. Though I've arranged the steps chronologically, remember that either stage can be the front wheel of the creative process. But in my experience, this has been the most common progression for finding one's inner creator. Step 1. Being curious. As a kid, there was no doubt that Lego created the building blocks of my imagination. It was an escape that allowed my mind to practice assembling a concept done before and then breaking the regulations to embrace those beautifully unusual ideas. But there was always this feeling of never advertising those ideas. Even when unintentional, someone will always dismiss our creative side, which only rinses the child's excited soul without any remaining self-esteem or inspiration. At the beginning of the movie, Bricksburg is a town under massive surveillance from the tyrannical Lord Business. And like a child with an inarticulate perspective, the citizens cannot consume many diverse experiences. We see this through the eyes of Emmet. And the viewer can gradually understand how curiosity stems from a natural tendency that has always complemented our evolution. Think about it. We make things that are better than previous things, learn to follow those limitations, but then after a while, we make more things that continue a cycle called innovation. For example, Emmet's morning routine has always been simplified to the suburban lifestyle where nothing exciting is happening. Every morning starts with each resident exclaiming, "Good morning, city!" as they deal with rush hour traffic and getting overpriced coffee. Those content with the regulations aren't opposed to the mundanity because it's all they've come to know. In 1956, psychologist J.P. Guilford described two cognitive patterns: convergent thinking and divergent thinking. Convergent thinking assesses the problem using an approach that can only be defined as a cost-benefit analysis. We are given a task and a deadline we must pursue, which results in a standard solution. Divergent thinking is about seeing every possible opportunity, gathering information to inspire those ideas, and most importantly, challenging ourselves to be curious about how we arrive at the solution. An example of convergent thinking is when Wildstyle tells Emmet to build a race car. From a creative person's perspective, I could see multiple possibilities, but just look at how he approaches this.
Don't see a wheel or 3 more wheels.
I'll give him this. He heard the prompt loud and clear. But when limitations arose, his instinct was to follow the instructions. Once his mind thought of a car, he initially saw the obstacle as only solved when provided with the resources. But an example of Emmet using divergent thinking came from their little trip inside his mind.
Who's the man upstairs?
See? He doesn't even know about the man upstairs.
Does he have like super gross hands that look like they're made out of big pink sausages? Like eagle talons mixed with squid? Whoa! That's what I was just thinking about!
Until then, his life had been described as a blank slate, never having an original thought in his body that could hold a friendship or win the approval of his oppressed town. His environment never nurtured this divergent mindset as a natural thought process. And even when building the double-decker couch, it only proved that through his convergent mindset came an idea that could only happen when you have very little practice thinking outside the box.
Your mind is already so prodigiously empty that there is nothing in it to clear away in the first place.
What makes Emmet different was that he was part of a system that wasn't informed about being curious as an acceptable thinking pattern. So when Wild Style and Vitruvius discover that Emmet was never trained to be creative, it is astounding to them. Both view limitations as an opportunity to break the rules and make something richer. However, Emmet was never told to defy those kinds of rules, but once those divergent thinkers surrounded him, it only inspired him. Being curious is simply about asking questions. Because of how President Business pledged nothing but order, every society under those regulations lost any original insight. But once Emmet had that vision, he started asking questions like, where am I? What's happening? What was that vision? Who was that person? And beforehand, he was the kind of guy who spent years watching a show called Where Are My Pants and never considered if the show's conflict would ever end by finding the guy's pants. When you are unaware of different perspectives outside your isolated environment, you never ask questions because you never have to. Step 2. Finding connections. According to psychologist Hans Eisnick, creative people tend to have 2 personality traits that speak to their abilities. One is openness, which means being open to alternatives or ideas. The other is agreeableness, which means finding joy in learning more about a topic or making connections that help solve a problem. If you take a look, this is a graph that illustrates the way a brain formulates our creative achievements. First, we use our cognitive variables such as intelligence, knowledge, technical skills, and special talents to implement the rationale behind our decisions. We consider environmental variables such as political, religious, cultural, or educational factors to help bring a purview to said decisions. But we never forget the final piece of the creative puzzle, our personality. Aspects such as internal motivation, confidence, nonconformity, and originality bring our core values to fruition. Eisnick also concluded that creative individuals are considered rebellious, which I have found to be a fair assessment. To me, this graph of creative achievement shows how each trait results from acting upon an impulse based on some form of restriction. The Lego Movie depicts this nature through the Master Builders. Each of them share the typical traits of openness and agreeableness, but behind the mask is a combined rebellion. For instance, throughout the film we see bits of Wild Style's backstory. We can tell she's always had a disoriented sense of identity by constantly changing her name, disliking those who follow instructions, and being with Batman. These are all signs of being accustomed to oppression, which only enforces rebellion. However, the film showcases that this character is a rebel fighter through her divergent thinking. The moment in the alleyway brilliantly presents several factors that influence how creatives function. In this case, she absorbs the situation by demonstrating all the cognitive variables shown in the graph. As for environmental variables, within the act of rebellion, she helps Emmet out of escaping the cultural norms that have permanently restricted her. And as for personality, she also checks every box. She understands limitations and dashes through the bricks without being hesitant to assemble this sick ride.
Whoa! Whoa!
Now, in Emmet's case, his journey progresses in another high-stakes situation. In the infamous Wild West sequence, one of the wheels in their getaway vehicle strays loose. It ricochets to Emmet and Vitruvius challenges him to solve their problem. So what does he do? He looks at the wheel, asks himself what he can do with these limitations, and finds connections by literally connecting his own body because why not? After observing the creative experience for over 30 years, psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi once mentioned, "If I had to express in one word what makes their personalities different from others, it's complexity. They show tendencies of thought and action that in most people are segregated. They contain contradictory extremes. Instead of being an individual, each of them is a multitude." Step 3. Embracing uncertainty. While researching the video, I stumbled upon a paper in which Guilford was asked, how can we close the gap between education and the development of creative individuals? He answered that educators need to not only teach what is, but there is a need to teach students to think about what could be. He always championed young people to have new, bold ideas. And the same should go for parents like the man upstairs. The huge reveal of the film is that the whole story is told through Finn, a kid with an incredibly wild imagination who only wants to embrace the uncertainty of his father's restrictive creations. And once he returns from work, the audience can understand how playing with these Legos can be thought of in two different sides. Those who can create by using their imagination, and those who want everything to stay the same.
You know the rules. This isn't a toy.
It kind of is.
No, actually, it's a highly sophisticated interlocking brick system.
Finn views his father as a voice that shames his ideas. And again, because of his environment, he isn't aware of how ideas have cascaded human evolution into the advancements we see today. If it hadn't been for that calligraphy class, Steve Jobs wouldn't have designed Apple the way he did. If it hadn't been for his fear of arachnophobia, Stan Lee wouldn't have created Spider-Man. If it hadn't been for being fired from a city newspaper because he lacked innovation, Walt Disney wouldn't have made the happiest place on earth. Creative individuals show a remarkable display of accepting chaos and ambiguity. They are willing to take chances for something to fail miserably or undeniably thrive. The viewer can tell that the man upstairs' closed-minded exterior comes from experiencing a consistent 9 to 5, which can grow into a gradual obsession to maintain stability and simplicity. In his world, there is no time to create something from scratch, but instead embracing accessibility that only inspires general satisfaction. And Finn was led to believe that he wasn't allowed to create, but to conform. However, once Finn and his father reconcile, it made me realize something I should have known a long time ago. Human beings are malleable. We can change and be convinced to make something great when we are approached with new experiences. Because you really can't write anyone else's experience as fluently as yours. You just have to believe. And though Emmet didn't want to be in this position, look how he turned out.
I can see everything.
We thought it was really interesting to tell a hero's journey story like that. But instead of it being Neo, who has all of these powers that are just about to be unlocked, it's a guy who is not special at all. And just the mere fact that he's told that he is the thing that activates something that we hope is in everybody, you know, a creative ability that just needs a little bit of encouragement.
Emmet took all the steps to be a creative person. He followed the creative tricycle by being curious about the environment that was given, finding connections to the results he wanted, and embracing the uncertainty by making something that, in this case, actually worked. Without this experience, he would have still been a regular, normal, ordinary guy. And as the wise Vitruvius once said, A corrupted spirit is no match for the purity of imagination. We as human beings can view risks as a hurdle, but once you convince yourself, expose yourself to different environments, mold the identity you have witnessed, can impact others, and most importantly, embrace and believe in your true voice, creativity isn't far from reach. It's always been there. Science and art should be respected as two powerful entities because both swing on similar horizons that collectively unite when we allow them to. Think about it. If it weren't for those cave paintings, we wouldn't have built the information necessary to process meteors taking down the dinosaurs. We wouldn't have created technology that has become the catalyst for our continued survival. We wouldn't have been able to make an ecosystem that thrived upon community. And if you don't have any time for creativity, incorporate it into your routine. Try something new. Be curious, find connections, and embrace uncertainty. Order another type of coffee because you can. Watch another television show that you'd never normally watch. If you have children, wear a blanket around your neck and pretend to be their superhero. Those little nuances make you smile as you say,
Good morning, city!
most of humankind has been instilled with hesitations to bring innovation to the world. But speaking from experience, the only job that will always guarantee success in our lifetimes is to connect, one brick at a time.
You don't have to be the bad guy.
You know, so much of creativity is building a synaptic pathway between two ideas that don't belong together.
You are the most talented.
Human creativity is nature manifest in us.
Most interesting,
I think creativity is the ability to find order in chaos.
and most extraordinary person in the universe.
Creativity always begins in the same way. It begins with a question. It begins with not knowing. It begins with a why. It begins with a what if.
And you are capable of amazing things.
Follow your own inner guide. It directs us.
Because you are the special.
I hope people watch the movie and then go and want to make things themselves and
yeah,
and
our
try something new.
dream was that you would turn the movie off and then run home and then build the most silly, ridiculous Lego thing you could.